Everybody can see these, right?
Yep.
Good. Good, good. And all right. So, again, I'm Joe, still Joe. I am here to talk to you about how to predict the apocalypse, how to know when your team, your project, or your company is in over its head, and more importantly, what to do about it. I run this company, Def Method, and I am writing this book, The Well-Grounded Rubyist, the third edition. I am proud and humbled to be joining a co-author and friend and former colleague, David Black, in writing the newest edition of The Well-Grounded Rubyist. It currently is available in early access right now, so you can get your copy. It currently covers Ruby 2.5, and if I miss my deadline by just enough time, it'll cover Ruby 2.6 as well. So get yours while you can. Now, I'm a bit of a music junkie, and so one thing that you will definitely get out of this talk, if you get nothing else, is a great playlist. I've created my very own apocalypse playlist, populated from songs and albums and artists that I've referenced here in this talk. So right off the bat, we have two such albums. I'll be quizzing you in a bit, but I'll give you these first ones for free. The one on the left of the screen is Cherry Glazerr and their album Apocalyptic, which I recommend highly. The one on the right is a 90s hip-hop classic called Extinction Level Event by Busta Rhymes. So this is a talk about talking, and more importantly, it's a talk about listening. And I'd like to tell you a bit about why I qualify to talk to all of you about talking. So I am a software engineer turned business owner. I spent 12 years as a software engineer. In my first 2 years as a software engineer, I was promoted to a team lead. Within 5 years, I was the vice president of engineering for a very large fintech startup. And I realized, only later on in life, that I wasn't promoted to those positions because I was such a great engineer, although I really wanted to think that. I was actually promoted to those positions because I was a good communicator. I could talk to people, and I could listen to people. I could translate things both for my team and outside of my team. I connected people in all different parts of my company. And I learned quickly that if I could communicate well, if I could talk well, if I could listen well, then I could lead well. And other people, luckily for me, saw that in me and put me in those positions. Nowadays, I'm a business owner, and I can rightly say that I make my living talking. I talk to everybody. I talk in my position as head of sales. I talk as a manager. I talk as a business owner. I talk as a colleague and a consultant. This is just a smattering of the people that I talk to. Basically, if you can think of anything in this sector of software, any position, I can tell you half a dozen people that I talk to in that particular position. It's that important to me, and it does come naturally. Now, one thing I've learned, and one thing that I think this particular conference does extremely well, is it presents the craft of software development as a multidisciplinary endeavor. In other words, if you're sitting there and you're writing software, you know that your job is not just to write code. In fact, that's not even why you were hired. You were hired to serve and further the interests of a business. You were hired to further the interests of a business. And that's not really sexy, and that's why you don't see it on any job applications. But that is what you're doing. At the end of the day, regardless of what your position is, regardless of your company, whether it's services or product, your job is really to solve business problems. The great Jerry Weinberg once said in his book, The Secrets of Consulting, way back in 1986, and some of you are already nodding your heads. Rule number 1, there is always a problem. And rule number 2, it is always a people problem. And I have found in my experience that this has been true. Quick quiz, who is this? Biggie Smalls. And why would this be up here? Yes, it is. The 10 Crack Commandments. Good work. The 10 Crack Commandments are the subject of a different talk, so it's a little outside the scope of this one. But what exactly are people problems? This is an artist that I really love called Sia, drawing markers on her face to remind us that some people really have real problems. But here we're going to talk about business problems. And I just listed a few of these right off the top of my head, things that I think are people problems. Have a look at this list. Can you see the people problem behind all of these? Yeah? Okay, good. I think the first one is pretty easy. If you're coming up short in lean or agile or Kanban or whatever your flavor of process is, then you can pretty much we all understand that these things they're really built on top of people. It takes buy-in from all different kinds of stakeholders. It takes communication among many different departments in order to make one of these processes work. And so if there's a failure, a lot of times it's a business failure. But what about an untenable bug rate? That certainly sounds like a software engineering problem until we dig a little bit deeper. If there's an untenable bug rate, at one point we might presume that that bug rate was manageable. And so something had to come along and make it unmanageable. And it probably was not the same engineers all of a sudden writing worse code. But it could be. For instance, did somebody on the sales team commit to something that the engineering team then had to deliver on a deadline? That may sound familiar to a few of you. Are you at a company where things are growing really fast and you're hiring on new engineers, and maybe those engineers aren't getting onboarded properly? Conversely, are you attriting great engineers with great institutional knowledge of the process, and they used to prevent bugs like this from occurring, and now they're gone? And if so, why? And the last one on the list, a product fails to gain traction, is actually my favorite because it's one that was really hard for me to understand. I'm going to tell you a personal story. At that VP of engineering role, I worked at a company called Benchmark Solutions. Benchmark Solutions was a fintech company right here in New York on Park Avenue, and it was comprised of a group of people that was among the smartest I had ever known. And we built fantastic software together. And there were smart people all over the place. It wasn't just engineers. There were quants. There were ex-Wall Street people. There were salespeople that all were incredibly impressive to me. In my role of VP of engineering, I am proud to say that we built one of the most stable software products still to this day that I've ever been a part of. It was a pleasure to work on that code base. We could deliver things in an instant. Our test suite was great. It worked flawlessly. And yet, we couldn't sell this product. Our sales team could not sell what Benchmark Solutions was building. And for the longest time, for 2 years, I spent railing against the sales team. I thought I was communicating, I thought I was listening, but I wasn't. I thought that it was us versus them. We were building something great, and they just can't sell it. And that's their problem, it's not mine. Until the day came that they were selling off the furniture in that place, and that problem became my problem, became everybody's problem. We were looking for new jobs. This was a serious thing, and it was a failure on my part. So I want you to ask yourselves, who are you talking to today at your company? Can you answer yes to any of these questions here? And if I gave you another couple of scenarios, are you taking your sales team out for coffee? Can your marketing team describe your agile process? If you handed your CEO a whiteboard, handed her a whiteboard marker, pointed her at a whiteboard and said, draw the steps or write out the steps of our bug triage process, could she do it? It may sound silly, some of those questions, but I'm here to present to you that if you're answering no to any of those questions, and especially if you're answering no to all of those questions, the problem might exist between the chair and the computer. The problem might be with you. And it's easy to make this mistake. I did. It's easy to say, well, my job is to design great software, implement a great process, test drive products. But when we do that, we neglect two very important things. One, what we do is very technical and most people do not understand it. And two, that's not their fault. The onus is on us. The onus is on us to make things transparent. because executives cannot plan for, and marketers cannot market, and advertisers cannot advertise that which they do not understand. So we need to reach out and we need to talk. And when I say talk, I'm talking about listening. We should talk with the goal of listening. As I mentioned, I was a software engineer for 12 years, turned business owner. Sales is not something that came naturally to me. It still isn't. I had to learn it. And so I started reading books. And one of the best things that I learned was the 80-20 rule. And it's not the 80-20 software delivery rule. It's a rule about listening. That you should spend at most 20% of your time talking. The rest of the time, 80% of the time or more, you should spend listening. Actively listening, asking questions, and then listening for the answers, and then asking more questions, gaining information. It's true that you need to talk. That 20% is important. You need to be able to be transparent. You need to be able to convey what it is that your process is. You want to talk about what your deepest fears are and what you're optimistic about. You want to be transparent to model that good behavior. But you can't expect transparency from everybody. And so you have to spend more of your time listening, much more than you do talking. So what are we listening for? Well, in software, we have a series of patterns that we like to rely on. And in speech, patterns exist as well, of course. And patterns are important. They describe the challenges in front of us. Easy examples of speech patterns in the software industry are product, MVP, bug. These patterns become recognizable as soon as we constrain the space of language. Whereas a product could mean anything outside of the scope of software, inside of software, we know exactly what it means. Outside of the scope of software, we know that a bug is squishy. But inside of the software world, we know that a bug is really a failure in a system. This one's an easy one, Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, but I recommend listening to this album start to finish many times, like I do. Now, anti-patterns are also helpful. In software, an anti-pattern is a commonly used pattern that is counterproductive. And in speech, it's very similar. Speech anti-patterns exist in spite of our best intentions. If we had the capacity to be open and honest with everybody all the time in our company, there would be no speech anti-patterns. But this is impossible. We're all human. And so we are not always going to clearly communicate that which is so important to communicate, especially a business crisis. But anti-patterns are helpful because they are stated often. They can be recognized just like patterns, just like MVP. But they need to be decoded. They are not going to come prepackaged, ready for you to understand and get to work. But they can lead us to the problem if we ask the right questions. And to emphasize why this is so important, I want to say to you that some anti-patterns portend disaster. Anybody for this album? Well, the album's stated. Anybody for this artist? MF Doom, that's right. MF Doom with his seminal album Operation Doomsday feels appropriate for this slide. Some anti-patterns portend disaster. Stakeholders can be communicating a business crisis. And remember, take the lesson that I learned. A business crisis can be a career crisis for you. So I'm going to go through 3 typical anti-patterns that I see. And I'm going to start by describing a story. And I'm going to talk about how I heard an anti-pattern, decoded it, and then tried to work for a solution. And I want that to be sort of the cadence that I communicate here. We have an anti-pattern, and then an understanding, and then an action. In this case, story number 1 is a brand new startup, well-funded startup. And they were doing some unique things. One thing in particular that I really liked was that it had this unique approach to job costing. And job costing is something that's so often overlooked in business. But at the same time, it was a business in a particular industry, and it had competitors. In fact, we helped do a competitive analysis, so we knew that there were similar companies. We built a 9-month timeline for releasing version 1, and we were really comfortable with it. Our software engineers started engaging. We were hitting our marks. After 6 months, I had no reason to think that anything was going wrong. Our engineers were delivering, people were happy. But as the release date drew near, people started talking funny. I was at a stakeholders meeting, and some conversation came up about a vendor that I didn't really know anything about, and then all of a sudden I heard it. Somebody said, well, you know, what we're doing here has never been done before. Right then and there, I knew there was a problem. What we're doing here has never been done before. And the problem is that this can't be a statement that's used to paper over a failure in business. So I got to work. I tried to decode what was going on. What we're doing has never been done before. I started to scratch the surface of that vendor issue. And I started to see the first obvious translation is that we're at risk of missing this deadline, or else we wouldn't have said something like this. The second thing that's just slightly below that is we don't know how to fix this problem. And finally, going just a little bit deeper, and after talking more with more people, I found the person who said this did not trust that the solution existed in that room. And that can be scary. One weird part of this anti-pattern is that once somebody says it, it can be contagious. All of a sudden, I was hearing it everywhere, from everybody. What we're doing has never been done before, like a rallying cry. When in fact, and it feels good to say it, but in fact, what was being hidden was that there was a misalignment on goals, there was mistrust among people that were making high-level decisions, and ultimately, there was a poor vendor selection that was going to doom this deadline and potentially the company. This anti-pattern is something that I like to call the snowflake. And that gives us the great Nat King Cole and his Christmas album, which I love. But it presents itself as an attempt to explain why progress is slower than expected, why traction is not taking off, why software is less stable. And there are other manifestations too, right? You could see what we're doing has never been done before. We cater to a specific kind of audience. That's a great one for explaining why you can't sell a damn thing. Well, we cater to a specific kind of audience. And what we have to do in these cases is we have to lean back on what we know. And what we know is that even when a business is unique, the challenges it faces are not. But we can do something about it after we accept that. We can talk to the person. We can listen to what they're really concerned with. We can get on the same page. We can connect with them, and we can start to work that problem. Let me tell you another story. This is a mid-market company. So this is a pretty large company, was not in danger of failing. It was not in danger of going out of business, at least not imminently. But they were repeatedly failing to deliver on deadline. And I was being brought in right around the end of the year, and I noticed some trademarks, right? I think everybody here, if you're an engineer, has been a part of this. There are too few engineers managing too many applications. That is a people problem, and it's not an easy one to solve. All of a sudden, right around the end of December, the beginning of January, the CTO's annual report came out, and he was kind enough to share it with me. And I saw this statement, this exact statement. We've learned from the past, and now we are firing on all cylinders in 2016. And as the consultant, I had to ask the uncomfortable question, what did we learn? And more importantly, what does it mean to be firing on all cylinders? What exactly is the goal? What does it mean to get better? How do we measure that success? So again, I started asking questions, and I started listening, and I talked to more people throughout the company. A subtle thing about this particular kind of anti-pattern is that there is an admission of something that has gone wrong. Really, this person is saying, well, we really screwed up back there, and we don't really want to look at it. We just know that it's going to get better. And when you dig a little bit further, you say, well, I'm fearful for my job or my budget or for my team. Remember, this is not a company that's going to go out of business tomorrow, but that doesn't mean anybody's job is safe when things are going poorly. Finally, at the heart of this matter was the CTO felt, that I need to espouse confidence despite not having a solution. I need to espouse confidence even though I do not have a solution. This pattern, this anti-pattern, is called the back patter. And you can see it in some other ways too. And it gives us it gives us one great artist and then another artist to talk about. I'll let you decide which is which. The back patter is papering over real problems by framing them as being in the company's past. Right? We're just starting to turn the corner. We're now firing on all cylinders. We're ready to run. Sorry, Bruce. What we're finding here, the person who says this is actually kind of volatile. It's actually a pretty dangerous situation, because what's happening is that this person who's saying this, again, this person who says, I need to espouse confidence even though I don't have any, is really looking for any port in a storm. And that means if you're not the person to go and engage this individual, then they are going to listen to the next charlatan that walks in the door and offers a quick fix. It's true, we've seen it happen. I can see the nods, you've seen it happen too. So in order to work this problem, in order to get at the root of this anti-pattern, you have to be the rock. You have to engage this person. You have to empathize without emotions. You have to be forthright in your own shortcomings and get on the same page with them, get aligned. If you do that, you have a chance of turning this around. If you let them just say, everything's going to get better, you're in for a world of trouble. All right, last story. This is an established startup. We worked with this company right around their 5th or 6th year in business. And at around that time, they had a full changing of the guard. CEO, COO, CTO, they were all out. All new folks were coming in. I had a particular relationship with the COO, and I knew that he knew that they had inherited a mess. They were not delivering on time. When they were delivering, there were myriad bugs. And one of the really scariest things was that there were production outages from which they could gain nothing. They couldn't even learn about the production outage to make sure that it wouldn't happen in the future. This is scary stuff, and this is when this person joined the company. Nonetheless, before we even set foot in the door, before we even made the sale, we met resistance to change. And I heard this statement. Exactly. It's hard to change our strategy in the heat of battle. And man, that's a hard one to argue against, right? This is like the warrior rallying cry. We can't just change our strategy in the heat of battle. We're in the middle of something important. We're in the middle of a fight. How could you ask us to change this? So I had to get to work because obviously things needed to change. Even this person knew things had to change. Because what we could see is that in this statement is an admission that the process is not working. If the process were working, I would hear something else. I would hear our process is just fine. The problem is elsewhere. Whether I believed it or not, that would be what that person believed. So digging just a little bit deeper, we find, yeah, I know the process isn't working, but I'm really scared that making a change is going to make it even worse. So even with an expected negative outcome, this person still did not want to make a change to the process. And so when you get right down to it, after speaking to this person and to other members on the team, we find, well, this person just came on board, they saw all of these problems, and they said to themselves, I don't trust my team to solve this problem. I have to control it. I can't take outside help. I can't take help from inside. I need to control the space. I need to control the problem. I call this anti-pattern the house of cards. And it evinces itself sometimes that way. We can't change our strategy in the heat of battle. We can't change our destination mid-flight. That gave us this image here. Anybody? David Bowie, the late and great. When somebody is resistant to a process change, you'll hear things like that. When they're resistant to a product change, you may hear something different. Well, we can't change this. This is our special sauce. This is our it factor. You can't change this. This is what makes us us. But this story actually has a happy ending. In this case, what we had to do was we had to realize that big changes were really scary for this person. Big changes, or even the suggestion of big changes, evinced this real threat. And so what we did was we kept making our changes smaller and smaller and smaller, almost infinitesimally small. Instead of saying, hey, why don't we try this agile tenet? Right? Why don't we try test driving? Well, that's a huge one. Instead, we boiled it down to the very, very basic. What's one change that we can make today by the end of this business day? And we will measure the progress and see if things get any better by 1 week from today. And finally, we were able to come to an agreement. We were able to meet at that point to say, okay, we can make one change today. Gradually, by and by, we started to see things get better. It didn't happen overnight. And we know that. We know that this isn't going to happen overnight. We know that change is incremental. And we know that if there are real software problems, that's going to take real time and investment to make better. But we have to understand that the person who is conveying an anti-pattern is speaking out of emotions. We can't change their emotions. We can't change that. We have to understand it. We have to be empathetic. And then we have to try to meet them in the middle. So this is therapy for me. Before I get into this, we have garbages, I think I'm paranoid on the top. Can anybody tell me what the bottom one is? This is a really tough one. No? I know some of you are running through your mental Rolodex. This is the 90s slasher rock band Therapy with a question mark. But this is therapy for me. At Def Method, we solve big, unwieldy problems for our customers. It's hard work. The reason it's therapeutic is because there is so much to be gained by putting in that hard work. We can help to turn a company around, and so can you. You can help right the ship. But you have to dig in, and you have to align with your customer. In short, you have to act. Yeah, this is me. This is me, and this is real. This is a painting that is actually hanging in Def Method right now. I have my wonderful and quirky employees to thank for this. This is me as Napoleon about to lead my troops over the French Alps. They definitely get my sense of humor. The action is, again, it's anti-pattern, understanding, and action. So start talking with people. Make sure you use the 80-20 rule and really listen. Get fresh eyes on the problem. As consultants, we often have the advantage of walking into something and having fresh eyes. We're seeing things for the first time that people maybe have been seeing for months and years over and over and over again. But there are ways that you can do this yourselves. Talk to colleagues at other companies or at former companies. Talk to teachers, talk to friends. Run some of the language by them. Say, hey, have you ever heard this before? Get fresh eyes on the problem. Try to come to an understanding. You have to understand that there is no winner and loser in a conversation with somebody who is using anti-patterns. You have to meet them on their level. And finally, the action is you have to commit to a solution. Ignore the craziness of a big bang solution. Fall back on what you know. Fall back on iterative progress, measurable results. Commit to a solution and work with your customers, and you can avoid the apocalypse that might be coming. That's it. That's all I got. I don't know where the time markers are in the room, but I think there is time for a couple of questions.
We have about 5 minutes.
Yes. Oh, okay, good. Perfect. Everybody's afraid to be the first person to ask a question.
Here we are.
Hey, Ryan.
Hey, Joe. Do you have a bigger list of anti-patterns? Because those are great.
Oh, thanks. I do have some that kind of fell on the cutting room floor, but I'd be happy to share them with you. Sure. Reach out to me.
Thanks.
At joe@deafmethod.com or on Twitter. Any others? Way in the back.
Thanks. We can work for it. So I found that listening is really hard, learning to listen well, and the 80-20 rule really rings true, but I'm curious if you have any tips on how to learn to listen well, especially when the instinct is to talk, and you're trying to sell.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, because it was hard for me too. And I see it in my consultants too, that they hear something and they immediately want to jump in with a solution. Well, I know how to solve that. Yeah, you do it too, Mark. One of the things that I find to be really helpful is to go into the conversation with a list of questions. 3 to 5 questions, not a whole bunch. But ask those questions and then really wait for the person to answer. Another thing that can be helpful is to just pause. Allow for some silence and be comfortable with having some silence in your conversation. More often than not, the other person is going to want to fill that silence. So they will say more. Right? So you can ask a question, they may give you a 1-sentence answer, and instead of saying, okay, on to the next question, just do that and see what happens. Count to 5 in your head. It's hard. I agree with you there. And like I said, this isn't something that comes naturally to me, so it's something that I had to practice. Good questions, both. Any others? Is anybody actively trying to get the Apocalypse playlist right now? Or has already listened to it because they were bored of my talk? Yeah, it's a Spotify list. Yep, it's up here. It'll be with my slides, right between apocalyptic and extinction level event.
Thanks, Joe.
Sure. Thank you, everybody.